In this video, I'm going to talk about two rather hilly road marathons, one in Taiwan and another in Hong Kong, and also some reasons you might want to walk or even stop for a bit at water stations. Before running the Sun Moon Lake Marathon in Taiwan, I ran quite a few trail ultras, but never a road marathon, which makes the decision to run this very hilly one a bit bizarre. The Sun Moon Lake Marathon takes place every year around the Sun Moon Lake in the middle of Taiwan. The race course is basically the circumference of the lake, which is only 29 kilometers in distance. So the race course adds an out and back route towards the end of the race to make up for the rest of the marathon distance. It is this out and back section that starts at around 26 kilometers that makes the race particularly difficult. Basically, you have a 4K descent and back with 270 meters of elevation gain, and after that there is still a 140 meters climb in less than 2 kilometers before a short descent toward the finish. This much of elevation gain, around 500 meters in the last 10k of a road marathon, is crazy. And the other part of the race is not flat, quite a few ups and downs, with one sustained climb of just under 100 meters, and I might be underestimating the total elevation gain here. According to my Garmin, it was 739 meters in total, but according to the organizers, it's 948 meters. At the end, I finished in just under 3 hours and 27 minutes, a not so wonderful time in another context, but it made me the 14th overall. The Sun Moon Lake Marathon usually takes place in late August. At least from my experience in the 2023 edition, it's very well organized. Top-notch aid stations, well-marked course, enthusiastic volunteers, and everything. But there might be a bit of a language barrier if you're not a Chinese speaker. And logistics-wise, although Sun Moon Lake itself is a bit out of the way, the organizers have buses to take you directly from Taichung to the venue and back. And from Taipei City, the capital of Taiwan, to Taichung, it takes just around an hour on the high-speed rail. A great hilly race to join if you happen to be around East Asia. The second marathon I want to talk about is the China Coast Marathon, which is actually the oldest in Hong Kong, first held in 1981. The course has changed over the years, but one feature has been the same: you either run up or down. The current course is roughly 2 out and back sections along the west and southern sides of the High Island Reservoir, and a bit more. The only flattish parts are basically the tops of the 2 dams that you are going to run through 4 times. The China Coast Marathon does not have the kind of sustained long climb as in the Sun Moon Lake Marathon. The climbs are more spread out. The biggest one comes at the very beginning with 80 meters of elevation gain in 1,200 meters. And there are 5 other longish climbs with 40 to 70 meters of elevation gain each in just under 1 kilometer or around 1.5 kilometers. The great thing about this is on every climb, you can console yourself with the thought that you only have to tough it out for several minutes, and then you will at least have some downhill to relax for a bit. At the end, I finished 7th overall out of around 300 runners. Given that my finish time was just 3:15, I didn't even think to see if I got any prizes before I left the venue. The race is quite well organized. Although the start line is out of town, the organizers have buses booked for runners at different convenient locations around Hong Kong, but the race venue itself lacks a bit of direction, and for first-time participants, you might not really know where the exact start line is until the last minute. Also, even though the race course is on a road with restricted traffic, it's not closed off for the race. So runners have to be always on the lookout for the occasional taxi and minibus, and some sections of the road is single lane, so you might have cars going head-to-head with one another and having to back off. As it's an out and back course, and half-marathon runners are running on the same course at the same time, you will have runners going in opposite directions, so sometimes you might have to step off-road to the side to keep going, and there are cows along the way as well. But my experience with the race overall is quite positive and quite smooth, and I really appreciate the feeling of community around the race. The big plus of the China Coast Marathon is that it's at a rather scenic spot with great view along the reservoir and of the sea. Anyway, as someone who's admittedly very limited experience in racing has mostly been trail races, apart from whether I should do some last-minute specific training for a road marathon, the biggest question is about having water on the run. On the trail, I like to have a sip here and there at any time I want, which makes the 3-4 kilometers between water stations or aid stations in the marathon seem excessively long. In fact, I brought along a soft flask for my first road half marathon. But as marathon water stations don't seem to be set up for refilling water with runners' own bottles, bringing your own flask seems to be a lost cause. Then comes the question, Even though water stations are set up for runners to grab at the cups of water while running, should I slow down and walk or even stop for a bit at the water station? The rationale is running fast for a marathon distance is tough enough. Drinking water from a cup with a wide opening while doing that is another skill. So much so that there are quite a few videos on YouTube teaching people exactly this. The first time I tried drinking from a cup while running significantly slower at the water station in my first half-road marathon was quite a failure. I hardly got the amount of water I wanted into my mouth. And it also made me feel like I have to juggle a lot of things at the same time, which is not a pleasant feeling when you are already exerting yourself significantly. So, at my first full road marathon, the Sun Moon Lake Marathon, I decided to simply walk or even stop for a bit at the aid stations. Or one can say the decision was forced on me, as sometimes I just went too hard on a climb that added to my desire to slow down and relax for a bit, like several seconds. I found it to be a game changer, at least mentally, if not physically. First, in those few seconds, it seems like I'm giving myself a great reward for my effort. It's such a luxury to stop running in a marathon, even for a few seconds. I can see other runners clumsily grabbing at the cups and pouring water in the general direction of their mouths, while I simply stroll along with a cup of water in my hand, drinking like normal, and even manage to say some thank yous to the volunteers. Second, in those few seconds, I know I'm going to get passed by other runners, but the very thought that it is me who's chosen to be passed by other people and be okay with that always reminds me that I'm running my own race and not against other people, and that I should do what I think best for my race rather than being driven along by what other people are doing. This idea itself I find quite calming mentally. And third, and this is going to be a contradiction to the second point, but our feelings are never bound by logical coherence, right? Once I start running again after a brief slowdown at the aid station, I usually find the strength to catch up with the people who passed me at the aid station. This, again, is itself a great mental reward. The idea is that these people that I end up passing just traded the luxury of stopping for a bit for nothing. In these moments, I can actually feel my facial muscles working themselves into a smirk. And rationally speaking, slowing down for several seconds at an aid station is really not that big of a deal. After all, most of us are not fighting for every single split of a second. And I find that I can usually make up for at least some of the time I lost by running a bit faster away from an aid station. That might not even be intentional, as I just feel a little bit more refreshed after several seconds of walking instead of running at a marathon pace. Anyway, making a case in favor of walking during a marathon in a video about marathons seems somewhat out of place and requires far less efforts than, say, teaching people how to perfect their skill of drinking from a cup while running. But I do find this to be the biggest lesson I've learned from my rather hilly road marathons, so I just put it out there and hope it might help someone.